All right, welcome everybody. I am joined by David Hall, aka Halsey, for part 3 of this series of game types. Hey Halsey, how's it going?
Hello. Going well. How are
If
you?
you missed parts 1 and 2, recommend checking those out. You can skip straight to this one if you're more interested in game engines, though, because that is the topic that we're talking about. We hear it all the time. Which game engine should I use as I'm building my portfolio? And we'll just chat about the differences and the pros and cons because it's not always a simple choice. So this video is going to kind of help outline what to watch for as you're choosing a game engine or as considering which game engines different studios might use, because every studio tends to be a bit different. So, Halsey, you know what's coming. What is a game engine?
Oh man.
How do
Uh
you even describe it?
okay. How do I describe so the way I describe it is in the simplest way, the game engine is everything about the game. When you play a game, you're not experiencing the entirety of of uh of all of it. You're experiencing the game, what we developed for you to enjoy and to actually play. But uh, the game engine has all of the tools necessary for the artists, for the engineers, for everyone to start to create everything that has to happen within that game. So it is extensive, robust. Like there's a whole lot of moving parts in it. Uh, yeah, it's massive.
It's a lot
Yeah.
like a film. There's like the final movie you see on the screen, but then behind the scenes, there was a camera, a set, lights, microphones, all these other assets that are sort of off screen that you're
Mhm.
not seeing. Um, that to me is like the game engine, you know?
Yeah, that's a good
Um,
way of putting it. And the audience never experiences that part of it unless they're like watching some behind the scenes stuff, but
yeah.
they're not partaking in the filmmaking process, much like they're not
Yeah.
partaking in the game making process.
Right. And sometimes a company will they do expose parts of the game engine. In the case of like Blizzard is known for its map editors that it did for Warcraft 3 and StarCraft 2, and even like the old ones, old StarCraft and Warcraft 2. The map editor is a lot like a game engine.
Mhm.
It's definitely a curated version of that, but it has tools for editing the map, um, adding in assets and that kind of thing. Roblox is known as like a public facing game editor that has a lot of tools. That's, I would say, much more like a full blown game engine in a way. Actually, I think Roblox, it's safe to say Roblox is a full blown game engine in and of
Yeah, I think
itself.
so.
You've
Yeah, I
also
think
got,
of like
yeah, go ahead.
oh I was gonna say I think of the Bethesda games where they support the modding community, but even then, like the modding community is not necessarily the same level as like Roblox, where you have access to like all of the tools for,
Hmm.
and that's probably one of the differences between a game engine and just being able to mod a game, where if you're modding it, you have access to a couple files, and if you change those files, it'll change it in the game.
Right.
Whereas if you have something that is containing a lot more depth in terms of tools and what you can do with it, you can create completely new games within this tool. I'm trying to avoid saying game engine because we're talking about that, but uh, you can create completely other games, and so many famous games have been made using that method.
Well, and that really brings us to my two favorite game engines, which would be Unreal Engine and Unity. They're the two most famous as far as in the game development community. So the story behind Unreal Engine is interesting because this was a video game. It was Unreal Tournament, and
Mhm.
Epic Games had this shooter. that was like kind of like space fantasy, gritty, a product of its time. And they're like, yeah, Unreal. Let's do what Blizzard does by like opening up a map editor and letting them make their own games with it, and basically just give them the engine. Let's just call it Unreal Engine. And so they did. And so basically, the general public had access to the ability to create games just like Unreal. It was built for shooters primarily because Unreal Tournament was a shooter. And that has now become a massive part of Epic Games' strategy. And now they have Fortnite, which is also built in Unreal Engine. And now they have the Unreal Engine for Fortnite engine, which is released, which is more similar to some of these others where they expose it in a more curated way. So Unreal Engine for Fortnite is more for beginners, or it's intended to be more for like modders who want to do stuff that is using Fortnite assets essentially to make their own video games, but they can't really make as much from scratch. It's like not quite at the same level that you would use at a studio because it's not the comprehensive thing, although it is pretty big what they've exposed for people. And I would imagine over time they're going to expand it. But it's interesting to see how it's evolved and kind of come full circle. It's like there was a game we had, and that's the namesake of the engine, Unreal Engine. And now it's up to version 5 at the recording time of recording this video. And now they've also released Unreal Engine for Fortnite, which is now Fortnite assets combined in with the tool. And so that's become quite massive. And many top level games are created using Fortnite, or created using Unreal Engine, not Fortnite. Um, who knows? Maybe
Fortnite on
someday.
the brain. Yeah.
Um, so they're using Unreal Engine to create next gen games at massive studios. Valorant at Riot Games is made using Unreal Engine. Project L, the upcoming fighting game, from Riot Games, is using Unreal Engine. Palia, the new cozy MMO that just came out, uses Unreal Engine as well. There's many, many major games that I can't even think of them all that use Unreal Engine. And then we have Unity Engine, which is another great option. Unity is typically used uh, for mobile games, for indie games, although that's not always the case. Sometimes Unity can move more into the pushing the boundaries of graphic visual fidelity and some next gen stuff. Typically, what we see though is Unreal Engine is used by fewer but higher scope projects, whereas Unity is used by many more projects for lower scope initiatives. So when I say high scope or low scope, I essentially mean how many people are working on it and how long are they working on it. Is it a lot of people for a long time, or is it a few people for a short time or shorter time? Unity is really great for putting out games that you want to get out with a smaller team on the like Steam or like the gaming market that way. Unreal is good if you want to do something that's like massive and high scope. Not always the case. The two are interchangeable, but that's typically what we see. And so, kind of depending on your interests of what you want to go for, that's typically what we recommend as a general rule. We do teach both at VFX Apprentice. We have content covering all that. So, I don't know, though. What's your perspective, Halsey? I mean, you've been with VFX Apprentice for a brief time, but out in the industry longer than me for the past few years. What's the current climate out there with these two engines?
Oh, well, I would say that it goes back and forth. I've worked on several projects that are Unity based, and then others that are Unreal based. It kind of bounces back and forth. There's less proprietary engines, and I don't think we've gotten to that just yet. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes studios make their own engine, and they just do things their way. Um, because they have super smart people who can set all that stuff up from scratch. And if you don't want to set things up from scratch, you've got other options. Um, so I've
Mm-hmm.
seen a lot of Unity, a lot of Unreal, and it kind of bounces back and forth. I'd say that's pretty accurate. Your description of it. There's a lot of mobile titles that get made with Unity. Not exclusively. There's plenty of examples where games were made for a PC or a console. They were using Unity, so it's not a limitation by any
Yeah.
stretch. Um, uh, some have different features that the other one doesn't. So there's some pros, some cons. A lot of it is preferential, of just like how you really prefer to work. And when it comes to effects, some artists really enjoy Unity. Other artists really don't enjoy how it works. Maybe because they learned effects in one other way. But to me, I think it's like trying to describe driving. You learn how to drive, and then whatever car you're going to use, there might be some differences. Maybe the Tesla has a few more features than your mom's Honda Civic, but that's okay. That's fine. The Honda Civic, it'll get you there. It'll
Mhm.
get you there just fine. So learn how to drive with both, and you'll be fine. Yeah, you can bounce back and forth.
I will say, once you've learned one, the other one is much easier to learn. And I
Mm,
do feel bad that we're not including other engines right now, because I know like Godot and CryEngine are like, hey, what about us?
true,
there's
true.
like,
Yeah.
there's definitely other engines available that people can pick up. We're just talking about the two biggest at this point. Um, but I oftentimes liken it to, you think of a cockpit of an airplane. If you get into a crop duster, like an old plane with a propeller on it, you've got some knobs and some levers, but you can generally figure out how to turn the thing on, how to pull back and steer, and you know put the throttle up and all that. And you can learn it in some time. You need some training for sure, but you can learn it. If you step into a fighter jet, and
Uh,
or like an airliner, like a 747 or something, there's a lot more buttons. There's a lot more controls. It can be freaking scary actually at one point, because like, am I going to crash this thing? Like, what is going on? There's so many buttons.
I'm
I
imagining
think
that scene from Airplane where they're panning across all the knobs, and it just like it goes on for like 2 minutes straight of just it's nothing but knobs and like altimeters and yeah,
so
yeah. There's a
yeah,
lot.
it just takes longer to learn. I would say, um, you know, my engine of choice at this point is Unreal Engine. That's like kind of the one that I use more. At the same time, it is more like a fighter jet or an airliner than it is like a crop duster as far as the visual effects tools goes. Unity has this interesting advantage for beginners because it is a little bit scary still. It has like a stack of options and things. However, using it is a little more what you see is what you get. It's like, I did a thing, it does a thing. I did a thing, it does a thing. Whereas with Niagara or Unreal Engine, it's just more advanced than that. And Unity now has this thing called the VFX graph, which is much more like Niagara. That's actually at a similar level of complexity to use, but they are keeping their old school particle editor, which used to be called Shuriken. So in Unity, you'll notice little like throwing star icons where your particles are. That's because it used to be called Shuriken. Kind of a fun tidbit. But in Unreal Engine, they used to have Cascade, which was also more complex than Shuriken, in my opinion. And they've kind of done away with it and made it into this Niagara thing, which at the time that we're recording this is a very advanced tool. It's something that you can learn. Like I've said before, we do teach both in our classes, and we take it broken down as simple as it can possibly be for an absolute beginner. Hadija Chamberlain does an amazing job with those lessons over on our site. And that's like something that you get pretty early on. But even still, even with those lessons, you can kind of wrap up and say, okay, cool, I know how to make effects. And I still don't know what 90% of the buttons do. there's there's a lot more here that I'm gonna have to just learn over time, I guess, and it can feel a little bit overwhelming. It can feel disorienting. Just know that that's normal. Game engines tend to be rather complicated, and that's because they can do anything. You can make any kind of game you want using Unreal or Unity. and
Yeah.
that's just kind of the name of the game, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Another reason why they're so complicated is uh, the, the game engine, like you said, is for every project. It has to apply for everything. So whether
Yeah.
you're making a really simple, uh, you know, chill type relaxing game, or you're trying to make the most complicated shooter RPG actiony kind of a thing with all these all these things going on, post processing all over the place, right? uh yeah, these game engines, they have to offer all of those capabilities. So
Mm.
in Unreal, a system like Niagara, it, there's a lot of buttons, there's a lot of features, but typically you're not even really using half of them for one project or another. So you might be working on one project that's like super stylized and cartoony and simplistic, and
Hmm.
you're not going to need to open up a whole lot of parameters. You're not going to need to fiddle with a whole bunch of blueprints and code and stuff. You can
Yeah.
just follow the KISS rule. You know what I mean? The keep it
Keep
simple,
it simple,
stupid,
stupid.
or keep it simple, silly.
We don't like to call people stupid, but yeah.
Keep it simple, silly.
There you go.
Yeah, yeah. Or you could be jumping over to, I don't know, Last of Us 3 or something. I don't know what's, but or Uncharted 17. The next gen, like it's gonna be in like 5 years. It's got to be completely hyper real, and we need to open up. We need to exhaust every feature out of something like Niagara or um, oh, I've already forgotten. It's the shader graph in Unity. Is that right? Or
Yeah.
what's it called? Yeah,
Yeah. Shader graph
yeah.
or VFX graph for the
VFX
VFX
graph.
part.
That's the one. Oh, how did I forget that? But anyway, needing to expose all of those things. It just depends on what you're using.
Well, and it's interesting you bring up Naughty Dog because I believe that they use proprietary engine, which basically means they made their own game engine to create what they do. And this is another question we get a lot. Is like, hey, I'm going to go work at a studio that doesn't use Unity or Unreal. They use something else. Should I still be learning Unity in Unreal? And the answer is definitely yes, because the fact
Absolutely.
is that each of these engines, they they learn from each other. They see what someone else is doing, and they're like, oh, they have a feature to make that easier to build. I see how they're doing that. Okay, let's do that in ours. So oftentimes you'll show up at a studio and they'll be using a proprietary engine, and you'll say, oh, this is similar to that thing in Unreal or that thing in Unity that I already know. I just have to find where the new buttons are, because they'll arrange it in a different way. It looks a little different. But like I said, learning your first one, that's the hardest part. That's the steep learning curve. After you've learned one game engine, you become much less afraid of future game engines, and it becomes a lot easier.
Mhm.
So Godot is another great engine. It's a little bit younger than Unreal and Unity, but it is open source, which is nice and appealing for some people. And they're doing some cool stuff with that as well. The community for Godot is very strong, very passionate, similar to the community with Blender. They very much believe in what they're doing and they want to make it better. It's always improving and growing. There's CryEngine, and then I'm blanking on other known game engines. I know there's like quite a few out there. I probably should have like prepared a list in advance. Um,
Well,
but you
there
can go out and
there's
research.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. The other ones that are coming to mind are like Game Maker, where
That's yeah.
some of them they're not. We were talking about how Unreal is the fighter jet. It's got all of the exposed knobs and whistles and parameters, and you can do whatever.
Hmm.
Some engines, they try to just service the community that is probably going to be making the same type of game with this. And so
Yeah.
the idea there is why invent the wheel when you can basically just use the same templates as a lot of these other things, much like
Yeah.
the Fortnite engine, where if you're making a game like Fortnite, why reinvent the wheel? You can just follow these things, and it gets you started on that path. So yeah, it really
Yep.
depends on what you're going for in the engine itself, what kind of game you're working on.
That's a really good point. And that kind of goes to modding. Again, it kind of comes full circle where if you just want to modify a previously existing game, like there's lots of games out there that they do that. They let you get in and do it. I know that Dota 2 opened up its tooling for modifications so you can build new maps and new game modes and stuff like that all using their engine. Minecraft is a I don't know how we haven't talked about Minecraft yet. um, Obviously, like heavy with the modding community that you can build all kinds of things with the Minecraft engine, and there's many others. Different developers open up their game engine to the player in varied degrees. In the case of Epic Games, they opened up everything and made it its own product, basically. In the case of Blizzard, they have like their game modes on their real-time strategy games. There's just all kinds of variety there. So learning game engines. I will tell you this: there's one video on that I did on YouTube of like super intro to Niagara. Never done it before. Let's make an effect from scratch. That one's kind of fun. You can check that one out. We really do what we can to make it more inviting. I think just because you're not a technical person, just because you don't know how to script or code, it doesn't mean that you can't learn a game engine. A lot of these things, it's just at the very beginning, it's just the first introduction to where's that button at? How do I do this? Whatever. You just need a few tutorials to get you introduced. We've got that covered. And then after that, it's back to being creative again and saying, "Ooh, I want to like put this effect together and make something flashy and fun and satisfying." So that's really been my goal, is to make the barrier for entry much easier so that a more wide variety of people can get in, people that are not as technically savvy, and also younger people that haven't had experience with this can get into it. Because I think that's where we as a discipline, as visual effects artists, are going to grow the most, is by allowing more artistry, more artistic type people to come in and start making effects. So that's kind of my own spiel on that. Anything you want to add before we wrap up?
I couldn't have said it better. Couldn't have said it better. Yeah. Don't stress about trying to learn everything all at once. That's not how anybody does it, or at least successfully. Start small. Start with the one thing, uh, and
Yeah,
yeah, if
cool.
the reason we're here is to help. So if you need a helping hand, encouraging word, anything like that, we are here.
Yes. Thanks, Halsey. This has been awesome, and thanks for watching. And we'll catch y'all in the next video.